Hey folks, this is Cindy. Thanks so much for joining me. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at no-line coloring on solid stamps, more specifically, a solid image that doesn't have any white space in it per se, and you're going to see more of what I'm talking about here in just a moment. I am going to be using the Penny Black Bundled Up Cling Stamp. This guy is so ridiculous, darling. I can't even stand it, and I was super excited to use it. As you can see, it is one solid cling. That image that you see there, that's going to be all solid ink here in just a moment. And that's what we're going to be coloring today. It can seem kind of intimidating, but it's totally not. Just stick with me and I'll show you what I'm talking about. I did take the foam out of my Misty because this is a rubber mounted cling stamp and I needed to be able to take that foam out of there so I could get a good impression on this. I am using Ink on 3 Fade Out ink, and I'm going to stamp this probably about 4 times because I wanted it to be nice and solid for the video here. After I have my image stamped, I'm going to jump right into my coloring, and I'm going to do my shade on my scarf here, starting with BV23. Penny Black has an example on the packaging that you can follow along if you don't know what colors you would like to use, and I love that. I had many ideas for this guy, but I decided to go along with the colors to show you exactly what I'm talking about. So after the BV23, I'm coming in with the R29, going right over the top of that BV23 and bringing it out quite a ways. Since this is the bottom portion of the scarf, it actually wouldn't have a whole lot of light or highlights. So I'm keeping that kind of small, and then I'm bringing in the R27, and you can see there's just barely any white paper left there. I'm going over the top of that with the R24, but I also blended out all of those other colors with that R24, and it just kind of helps blend all of those colors together. And I'm also using expressive blending cards, so that helps a bunch too. Now I can work on the rest of the scarf, and I'm mapping out where I want that darkest shadow to be up here on the top, because I don't necessarily need to draw a solid line down here on the bottom of this second fold on the scarf, because when I'm done coloring this in, I'm going to add enough shadow with my colored pencil that I don't necessarily need to add it with my Copic. And also I don't want to go over, or make sure that I'm not going to go over that bottom portion of that scarf that I had just done. It's going to start to look a little blobby if I do that. So you can see I have that gap there on that middle one, but I do have some BV23 running down in between the first fold on the scarf and the second fold on the scarf. Now you can use whatever light colored ink you'd like. I love Ink on 3 Fade Out ink because you can't even tell that I'm coloring over the top of this ink. It is perfect. It doesn't change my colors at all. It doesn't change how my colors dry back or anything like that. It is perfect, but you're welcome to use whatever color that you would like. Now, when you're coloring in solid stamps like this, it can seem a little intimidating because you don't have those white spaces that really differentiate between one section of your image or one portion of your image from another, but it's actually a lot easier than what you think. Now, I did kind of cheat a little bit with this Penny Black stamp because although it is a primarily solid image, there is some grooves and recesses within the stamp, the rubber stamp itself, that kind of helps give that differentiation. You can see up there on his hat, you can see that band. That's kind of recessed a little bit in the rubber stamp itself, so it doesn't stamp as solid as what the hat does, but it's the same principle no matter what you do on a solid stamp. You're basically just going to follow the shape of it. Take your time. And I'll actually show you here pretty soon up there on that hat. I kind of lost my way a little bit and kind of had to map it out. So I'll talk about that more when we get there. Now I'm coloring in the knot on the scarf. I want that BV23 up there on the top, a little bit running down both sides of it. And then right there in the middle, I kind of brought that out a little bit right where I'm with that R29, because I want to have that be just a little bit darker so it looks like it's sitting in just a tiny bit. It gives that knot a little bit of texture. Now I did leave this white gap running down the center of that. Now if I were to do this again, I would actually color that in with at least the R29, if not a BV23, and then work my way out to my lightest color. As it is, it's going to make that one section there look like it's actually folded up and out as opposed to tucked in within the fabric. Hopefully that makes sense. At the end of the day, it's not a big deal. It's just a little bit of a detail that I notice when I'm looking at it, but you could skip that if you would like. All right, so now I need to work on the sections of the scarf that are sticking out here, and both of these are going to have a slightly different approach. So this one is going down and up, and I want to make it look like this is actually going downward. So I need to run this BV23 down this one side. I do want it to look like it's just a wee bit tilted. You could actually run that BV23 down both sides and bring it in a little bit like I did right there on the right side. I was just going to see if I could make this look like it was tilting away from the eye a little bit on the right hand side. You could also go heavier on that right hand side like I did there and reinforce that tilting away from the eye all that much more if you'd like. I'm also adding some of this BV23 in this fringe area here. You don't necessarily need to do that. With a Copic marker, they're really thick and it's going to be really hard to get into that fine detail. Number one, I'm doing no line coloring. Number two, this is a solid image and I have a little bit of creative license here to color outside of the lines. If you wanted to skip this darker BV23 down here, you totally could. I just kind of like the way it looked and I wanted to kind of test it out and see where that was going to take me. Also, I did color in some of those fringes almost completely with that BV23 because after I color those in, I want them to look like they're going to curl under a little bit. So I needed to add that extra shade to make them look like they're going to do that. So again, once I'm done with that BV23, I'm coming in with that R29 and I'm going to go right over the top of the BV23 and bring it out a little bit more. Now, I actually have a lot of space to color in here and you could definitely go a little bit heavier with the R29 than I did. At this point, I don't know what my problem was. I decided to back off a little bit on these darker colors and I really didn't need to. So don't feel like you're going to get heavy-handed here because you won't necessarily, or you can't necessarily. There's a lot of image to color. It's kind of hard to see in the video, but all of that area that's sticking up in our faces right now, all of that needs to be colored in. And the darker you go on that one side, especially if you're coloring in with the right, the more tilted to the right it's going to look, and that's totally fine. You can't go wrong with that. Once I was done with that R29, now I'm bringing in a R27, and here's where you're going to see what I'm talking about with the amount of space I have to color in. So I'm already at my second to last color, and I still have a lot of white space to color in here. And that's okay, but again, don't be afraid to go in there and add that color. At this point, I could add plenty of this R27, and I would be okay. I don't. I'm bringing in the R24 now, and I'm going to blend this out. Now, I also want to make sure that I have a good blend on this because I don't want to have to try to correct it later with my colored pencils. I'm not going to go that heavy with my colored pencils, so I need to make sure that I've got a pretty good solid blend there. Now, I did speed this portion up because it's kind of, once you see me lay down that BV23 and go in with that R29, I'm just repeating the same motions just with the next color in line. Now I need to do this scarf that is coming out to our left. Now this guy isn't going towards our faces at this point, but I do need to add some shadow there closest to his face because it's right there in that knot. It is going to bend back away from the eye, so it needs to have some shadow there. It also bends at this point, so it's going straight out to the left and then it bends up towards our eyes, so I need to add some of that shadow there. And I also want this bottom portion to look look like. It has a little bit of a bend there. I'll reinforce that some more with my R29 and then again with my colored pencils. So I need to make sure that this is starting to recede from our eye, but it has some of its own shape. Again, I'm adding this BV23 to these fringes here at this point. You can kind of see me kind of guess, where do I want to put this? And maybe I shouldn't have put it there. It's not a big deal. I'm going to keep going. And at this point, I need to stick with continuity anyway. So here is our R29. I'm blending that out. Now I am speeding this up, folks, because I am just literally repeating the same motions I had just done with that BV23. I am just starting to fill in this image at this point, so there's no reason to slow down and show it to you any further. I was also thinking at this point while I was coloring it in that I should add some texture with my colored pencils. So this looked like it had a little bit of a weave to it, some tight weave within the fabric, and it would look a little bit more fabric. I totally forgot to do that, but I think it would look really groovy. You can totally leave this solid just like I did. And I guess at the end of the day, you could call this a silk scarf because it is a little bit solid and a wee bit shiny. But I think the scarf would look fab if you drew in some tiny little cross hatching for a more textured look on the scarf. And you can totally do that with your colored pencils. You don't have to do it with your Copics. But again, it would be totally groovy. I wish I hadn't forgot to do that. I was also thinking while I was coloring this in that this scarf in different colors would be so fab. I think that you could do blue. You could definitely do green. I think a big purple scarf would be awesome too. Again, I went with the red because I was going to stay true to the packaging for ease for today's video, but oh man, you could do so many different colors and it would be darling. So I'm also going to color these berries in with the same colors I had done with the scarf, and I'm choosing that because I want the continuity within my image. There's no reason to bring out other colors and add that to our color scheme. And these reds will work just perfectly. I am drawing some very lazy C's in the berries, and I'm just keeping them to the edge, and I'm kind of rotating them a little bit so they all don't kind of meet up. You don't want them to look like one big blob with your shade. So I kind of varied those C shapes just a little bit. Now I'm coming in with my R29, going right over the top of that BV23 and blending that out just a little bit more. I do want to keep a pretty decent highlight or quite a bit of light within these berries because I want them to have a little bit of shine, so to speak. I want them to catch the light when I'm done coloring this in, because these are at the top of the hat. They are kind of tilted up towards us, so they would have a wee bit more light than even what the scarf did. So once I was done with the R29, going in with the R27 again, and now the R24, and I'm blending all of that out. I do kind of concentrate on those darker areas a little bit more with that R24 and kind of knock back some of the darkness of that BV23. I felt like it was just a little too much. So now we're going to start coloring in our snowman, and this is going to seem crazy scary, but trust me, right now this is going to look wicked dark and you're going to think that I am out of my mind, but hang in there with me. It will work out. I'm starting with the BV23 and I'm going in where my darkest shade is going to be. So I've got right down there by the scarf, underneath the brim of the hat there on the left-hand side, underneath his carrot nose, around the right-hand side because he does have a round head. So I need to have a decent amount of shade there. Now I'm not bringing it out as far on the right as I did on the left. I need to conserve that a little bit, but I still want it to look round. I'm also coming in with a dark gray Staedtler pen to color in those eyes before I get ahead of myself with any more of my Copic coloring, because I need his little eye peepers to stand out. Now I'm coming in with the BV20 and I am blending out that BV23, and I am going to make sure that this is a pretty decent blend between these two. I'm really going to work at those. I don't want to oversaturate it and I'm not scrubbing it, but I am making sure that those two colors are blending pretty well before I move on. Now I'm bringing in the B60. Now this is a little bit more on the blue side. You can definitely get a violet tone out of this, but going over that BV23 and the BV20 are gorgeous. However, at this point, you're probably thinking that it looks insane dark and I ruined my snowman. I didn't. Hang in there with me. You're totally going to see here in just a few minutes what I'm talking about. I do want to make sure that I knock back the edges of that B60 just a wee bit. I do want it to blend out to a nice white. And now it's had a few minutes to kind of dry back, so it's going to look lighter yet. However, it still looks dark, and it's going to look dark because we have no other reference or very little reference of color around it. We just have that red scarf, but we still have a lot of white going on in this card. So it's going to look dark, but again, hang in there with me. You'll see. Now I'm going to start on the band on this hat. And the reason why I'm starting on the band next is because I want to separate the brim of the hat from the top of the hat. And the best way to do that is going to be coloring in this band and getting it out of our way here. And then I'm going to be able to see those lines a little bit better in here in just a moment. I'm starting with the YR18. Now I'm bringing in a YR14 and I'm blending that out. Now I do have a little bit of a problem with my YR18. I needed to change the tip on it. It's at the point where it's kind of sticky. However, I didn't remember that, and I don't have any new nibs for that marker, so I just kind of forged on. However, if you find that, and if you find it's too sticky and hard to blend, don't use that marker until you get a new nib, folks. I'm a glutton for punishment, and I was committed, but typically don't do that, folks. Now, I also felt like I wasn't getting a good enough blend between that YR18 and that YR14. So I did bring in a YR16 and blended those out a little bit and then stretched that YR14 out just a little bit more. Now I'm coming in with that YR12. I did make sure that I had my darkest shade with that YR18 up underneath those berries, and then over on that left-hand side of this band, so it looks like it has some more shape to it. It's going to recede from the eye. It's going to make it look more rounded that way. After I had that blended out, then I make sure that all of my lines are just nice and clean here, but then I'm going to take these same colors and I'm going to work on the nose. The reason why I actually chose these colors for the band isn't because of the band. Now, on the packaging, it does have an orange band. However, I chose my oranges to match my carrot on the nose, but also work for the band. So again, we have some more continuity. I have the red in that scarf, the red in the berries. I have the orange on the nose, and I have the orange on the band. It works out perfectly. So again, I'm starting with my YR18. I'm going right up around, I suppose, what would be the bridge of the carrot nose, and then kind of down along the bottom side, but I'm making it look a little bit bumpy. I bring it up just a little bit higher in some areas. I don't want him to have a smooth carrot nose. I want it to look like it has a little bit more texture, and you could certainly add a more texture in your colored pencil. I kind of don't because I kind of spaced it out, but you totally could. Again, this time I'm bringing in the YR16 right away, coming in with that YR14. Now, look how much white space I'm going to leave myself when I'm done with this YR14. It's not going to be a whole lot because it's a carrot, folks, and I feel like shiny carrots on a snowman would be just weird. So I don't need a lot of highlight. I do need just a tiny bit of light, though. It is going to have a tiny bit, but not a whole lot. So now that I'm done coloring his nose, he's going to start that BV23, BV20, and the B60 on his face. That's going to start receding a little bit. And then I'm going to color in these holly leaves and then the hat, and then it's going to seem like that color recedes back that much more. At that point, it will jump to my background already being done. I apologize, folks. I did not record it, and I really did not want to have to re-record it. It's pretty much super easy. I used some BGs that I will have listed down in the description below, as well as in the available PDF if you're interested in those colors. It was super easy, but again, I apologize that I didn't record it. Now I'm going to keep these holly leaves really, really simple. I really had zero inspiration for them when I was coloring them in. I was just kind of playing around, if I'm being totally honest. So I don't even know that I can 100% explain to you what I did. I did start with the YG97, then I'm bringing in the 95, and I'll finish that off with the YG93. I'm basically running the darkest shade down the center, bringing some of that shade there at the bottom where they connect to those berries. I also ran them up the sides where they would curve in a little bit. You could absolutely skip that if you would like. Again, that's where I was just playing around and kind of doing my own thing. And then I called it good with that. Okay, so as soon as I'm done with this, I'm going to start coloring in this hat. A couple things on the hats. You could definitely go as dark on this hat as you would like. I initially started out with a C7 and I colored the whole thing in with that being my darkest color. I could have definitely gone a little bit darker. And my plan was, as I would start with the C7, color everything through C7, C5 within a C3, and then see how I liked it. And if I wanted to go darker, I could go darker. I almost did because I really feel like I wanted this to read a little bit more black. I didn't because although I could go darker and make the hat look more black, it was fine that I didn't. And at this point, I was just kind of ready to move on anyway. So here's where I need to kind of map out a little bit what direction I'm going with this hat. So I'm asking myself, do I want the brim of this hat to stick up just a little bit? And I'm eyeballing the reference photo in the stamp. And I do want it to stick out, but before I commit to too dark of a color, I took my C3 and I kind of mapped it out with that, kind of gave me an idea. Now I'm coming in with that C7. I'm going to do this bottom portion because I know that this shape is correct. I know that up underneath this hat, it needs to be a little bit darker. So I know that I can start with my C7 and get this shape right, come in with my C5, and then add just a tiny bit of C3. You could actually just totally finish that off with a C5 after the C7 and you'd be good to go. Not a whole lot of light's going to get up underneath there, so it's really not a big deal. But now that I have that in there, it gives me more direction of what the top portion of the hat is going to look like, so I can finish coloring this in. Now on this side of the hat, I want it to look like it is kind of bowed down towards his head and moving away from the eye, because the back side of this brim is going to have a round shape to it. So I'm adding my C7 there and I'm bringing it forward just a little bit further than what you would think you should, because I really do want it to look like it is going down towards that scarf. It is bending down. So I need to add that shade there. I also added that C7 over on the right hand side because I trusted that I could see that shape there. Now I'm bringing out that C5 over the top of that C7, and I am eating up quite a bit of that white space. There is not going to be a lot of light or a lot of highlight right here, if any. It needs to have just a little bit, but the C3 is just going to be a wee bit too light on that. Now, because I wanted this to look like this portion of the brim is bending up away from his face, I am taking that C5 and I'm coming in on that right-hand side a little bit over the top of that C7 and that I had on the bottom portion of that brim, and bringing that out just a little bit until it connects to the rest of the brim, and then I come in with that C3 and blend that out a little bit more. Now I felt like I did lose some of my line and my definition here, and now that I have everything colored in and I can see the shape of this, I'm going to come in with that C7 and I'm going to add just a little bit more and kind of refine that shape a little bit more, kind of smooth it out. Now, because I am adding that C7 a little bit higher up underneath his brim there, I need to blend that out again with that C5. We're looking for a rolling shape, nothing too abrupt. It's not going to be a sharp fold. It's going to have a rolling shape to it. So I need to add that C5 and blend out that C7 just a little bit, and then I can come back in with that C3 and finish that off, and then I am good to go. Now I can start on the top portion of his hat. Now, again, I want this to look like it's moving more away. Now, at the end of the day, folks, I'm going to be honest. I wasn't 100% happy how I finish off the top portion of his hat. It almost ends up looking like a Christmas stocking to me, as opposed to a black top hat. But whatevs, you live and you learn. This is how I colored it in. I'm coming in with that C7 and I'm going right along that left-hand side as well as the top left, and I'm going to bring that up towards the top right. Now, I actually should have done the same thing over here on the right-hand side. I don't. I start here on the right-hand side and I bring that in, especially adding that C7 underneath those berries because that's going to be dark underneath there. But then I get to the top right-hand point of this hat and I'm stopping and I'm thinking in my mind, I'm thinking that I'm going to add that C5 and then a C3 and make that super bright because it's sticking up to the right. And that wasn't necessary. I still could have gotten the correct amount of highlight and roundness out of this by sticking it strictly to the center. I could have colored in dark on the sides and the top and kept all of my light there in the center. But again, I did not. All right, so after I have my C7, I'm coming in with that C5, going over the top of that C7, blending that out a little bit. Now, again, we have a lot of space to cover here. And the other tip for you folks is make sure that you have plenty of ink in your markers, because even if you're using Express It, even if you have a really good flicking technique, if you don't have enough ink in these markers, it's not going to blend. This is a lot of space to color in. After I was done with that C5, I'm coming in with that C3. Now look how light that is up there. And this is where I start to think, yeah, it looks like a stocking, because I'm thinking that like that whole light area is like the toe on a stocking. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Anyway, moving on. So now we're going to start with our colored pencils, and I have the Prismacolor in dark purple. And again, I'm going to start down here with my scarf and say it with me, light hand, sharp pencil. I have this pencil wicked sharp because I want these lines in these folds to be super duper fine. They're not going to be necessarily be super fat, and I don't want to add a whole bunch of pressure on this trying to get my color on my cardstock, because I don't want a purple scarf. I want a red scarf. So super sharp, super light hand. I am kind of stretching out some of this dark purple in areas that I hadn't done with the BV23 or the R29, because I am trying to reinforce some of that texture where the fabric itself would be folded in on itself. So I am adding a few more lines there. You can really see that here on this portion of this scarf, and I do believe the one underneath it, I kind of add a few more even. I am definitely using the tip of this pencil to my advantage in these darker areas, the larger areas like right there and right there. I will go in very tight circular motions, but on those thinner lines, I am at my starting point with a super light hand, and I flick it out a lot like a Copic pencil, and I'm making sure that the tips of those lines are very feathery and very light, that you don't want to go too heavy on those. There are some of these areas where I decided I wanted to push them back even further, so I do end up bringing in a black grape. So right here where that knot meets those folds on the front of the scarf, I really want to push that back pretty far. So I'm just going in with a tiny, tiny bit of dark grape. And then I'll go back and blend that out with the dark purple, and then I'm good to go. Now at this point, you can see that I have my background colored in here, but look how much whiter and lighter his face is. So those colors looked so dark to begin with, but now it just looks like he's white and he has some shade to him. He has shape to his face, and that's perfect. That's exactly what you want. When you get into coloring white, and I'll actually have another video here in the next week or so where I share more of that, don't freak out. Persistence is key, folks. When you're coloring in white, it's not over till it's over, because once you start adding colors in and around it, that white totally changes Coloring white with Copics is probably one of my most favorite things ever to do. It's like magic to me. It's like doing a whole bunch of masking and then you pull off the masks. It's like Christmas. I love it. All right, so once I was done with that black grape and that dark purple, this is the Prismacolor in Crimson Red, going right over the top of that dark purple and black grape and blending it out just a little bit more, but I am leaving a ton of Copic to show through. Now I do kind of knock back some of that lighter area there on the center of that scarf because it was reading just a little too light there. Then I come in with the Pablo Red and just anything that looks like it is going to stick out closest to my eye, I go in with a super duper light hand on that Pablo White and call it good. I'm going to repeat the same thing on the rest of the scarf that I did on that front portion of it, and I'm just going right over the top of my Copic coloring. Now, if I feel like I can add just a little bit more shade or bring that shade out just a little bit further with this dark grape, or I'm sorry, the dark purple and the black grape, let me try that again, then I do. But overall, I really want this to read a very nice red, so I am trying to be pretty careful with that. Also, I am sharpening my pencils really frequently during the coloring of the scarf because it is so important on this. These are very fine, tiny areas in some cases. And if you're going in there and you're adding super fat lines, not only are you going to lose the depth of color in this red, but then you're going to start losing your shapes of what this is supposed to look like. And then it's just going to set your whole other image off. So I am sharpening my pencil frequently and making sure that I'm going in with a very fine point. Okay, also I am getting ready to start on the portions of the scarf that are hanging down and going off to the left-hand side there. Now, when we had done this with our Copic coloring, this was a lot to color in. For a stamped image, this is a lot of Copic coloring. However, with our pencils, we don't need to necessarily worry about this. At this point, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to color over the top of everything. We can absolutely afford to leave as much of this Copic coloring to show through as possible, especially if you got a good blend on your Copic coloring. You don't need to add a bunch of colored pencils. So at this point, I'm just kind of eyeballing this and I'm asking myself, how much do I really need to add? And it's not a whole lot. Again, I want to reinforce those darker areas, especially where the scarf here is connecting to the knot and the scarf underneath connects it to the knot. Those would definitely have quite a bit of shade to them because they're going to push back further in where they're bended and connected to that knot. Up here underneath, I'm going to add a little bit of that dark purple, and this is also super light hand because I'm coloring over the top of a pretty large area of red. Adding too much of that dark purple, you're going to notice it, so you got to be super careful here. And I'm also kind of looking at those fringes and I'm kind of trying to decide how much of this dark purple I'm going to add where I had that BV23. I can compensate for some of that BV23 on those darker shaded areas of the fringe by simply bringing in that crimson red, which I'm doing right now. And I'm going to go right over the top again of that dark purple. I'm going to blend that out, but look how much of that I didn't color. I don't need to. I just need to blend it out. Now, this crimson red is almost identical to an R29 and an R27. So you're going to be going over the top of this and you're going to feel like you're not adding any color at all. Trust me, you are. If you go too heavy-handed, then you definitely see it the most, but it's a really great color to get that perfect transition between that dark purple and the BV23 into those lighter areas. So this crimson red is definitely worth it. Now I'm going to add this dark purple into these fringes, and I decided since I already committed to them with the BV23, I might as well just go with it and kind of see how it turns out. Again, I'm not 100% certain that I like it, and you could definitely skip this part. However, it was kind of nice to see what the finished result was. And what I see in this now that it's done is it makes it look like the fringe has a little bit more dimension to it, but it almost looks more rounded than maybe what it would. So note to self, in the future, if I were to do this, this is not the technique that I would use in order to color in that fringe, because it's not quite right. It's not wrong, but it's definitely not quite right. And while I have those colors out, and because we use the same Copic colors on the berries as we did the scarf, I'm going to use the same colors on the berries as I did the scarf with the colored pencils. I'm also going to make sure that I add some of that highlight in there with that Pablo. I'm going to go a little bit heavier with the Pablo on those berries than what I do on the scarf, because again, I want those to read like they have a really nice light spot on them. I don't want it to be too bright and too vibrant. It's definitely not a hot spot, but it does need to have a little bit more light to it. I have the sped up here on the bottom portion of the scarf because I'm just repeating the same thing as I did on that left-hand portion of the scarf. Now at this point, this would be a really great opportunity to add in that cross-hatching, that texture. And if I were to do this, I would actually add in that with the dark purple. Again, super sharp pencil, really light hand, but I would definitely do that dark purple. I would do the dark purple and then I would blend that out with my crimson red before I added any other shade or any other colored pencil work to the scarf. So it all looks like it's one cohesive thing. Okay, so now I'm bringing in that Pablo. The reason why I chose the Pablo white for this particular image is because of its opacity. It's actually fairly transparent for a white colored pencil. I would probably say the most transparent out of all the whites. It's still not super transparent, but it does have some transparency to it. I don't need a stark highlight on any of this. And because the Pablo is so transparent, I can trust that I can add a little bit more pressure and build this color up. And it gives me kind of that safety net to say when. Unlike the Prismacolor or the Derwent Chinese white, that's just way too heavy. You don't need anything that heavy. So that's why I chose that one. Okay, so now I need to start doing the colored pencil on my guy's face here, and I'm actually starting with the Prismacolor in IndigoBlu. Light hand, sharp pencil. I don't want this to read blue. I'm just going to reinforce those darker areas with that. And then I am going to bring in the Prismacolor and Periwinkle and go over the top of that. The Periwinkle has a decent amount of white in it, so it will kind of knock back some of this indigo, and that's fine. The indigo, if you go in too heavy, it will look blue, and you don't want that. You're just going for darker, not bluer. I'm also going to refine more of the shape on the outline of this guy's head with those indigo with the indigo at this point. This is where I'm cleaning up those edges and making sure that they're nice and crisp and that the edges look a little bit more refined. I'm also going to make sure that I push this portion of his head back further up underneath this hat, and the IndigoBlu will definitely do that for me. Now, I don't need to bring it out too far because I am going to come in with this Periwinkle and I'm going to use this to kind of blend some of that out. I'm also not completely covering up all of the Copic coloring I had just done. You don't need to go out to the edge of your Copic coloring, folks. In fact, I would say that I probably stop around the point that I would have started with my B60. So I'm going over the top of the BV23, the BV20, and then about the point where the BV20 would have started blending into that B60 is where I come in and stop with the Periwinkle. After I have that done, I can move on to the holly. I still have the IndigoBlu in my hand. I'm just going right down the center there, kind of reinforcing some of those shadows. I'm just kind of playing around. I don't know what it was with this holly. Let's be honest, folks. I don't know what it was. I looked at it and I was like, oh, those are cute and those are really easy. I think I'll play a little bit. Like, I don't know. Typically, I have a thought in my head and a rhyme or reason to what I'm doing. But there was just something about these holly that I'm like, nah, I'm just going to do what I want. And everybody can follow along with Cindy. Okay, so once I was done with that indigo blue, I'm coming in with the Prussian green, and I'm going right over the top of that indigo blue, and I love how this looks. I love going over the top of indigo blue with greens. I think it's just like one of the most amazing things on the planet. So I'm going to blend out that indigo blue and just a little bit more into that olive green color with this Prussian green. I'm going super light here, folks. Prussian green is a fairly decent dark green, so it doesn't take a whole lot. You don't need to add a whole lot to it. Now at the tips of that holly, and I believe the one underneath it, I hadn't initially done any YG 97 or 95. I had colored the majority of that in with the 93, and I decided to add a little bit more of that Prussian green to it so it would kind of bow back away from the eye a little bit, and I think I like that a little bit better. Now I do add just a little bit of apple peel, or I'm sorry, lime peel to that and blend that out, but you could totally skip it. That color is not necessary. Okay, so now I can start coloring in the band and the nose. It's going to be the same colors. And again, I have the indigo blue in my hand. And yes, I am coloring over orange with indigo blue. However, trust me, it totally works out. I do want to kind of sketch in some folds and a little bit of wrinkling in this band. I didn't want it to read as smooth as what I had Copic colored it. So I'm using the indigo blue to do that. I'm also pushing this band back up underneath those berries as well as on the left-hand side. Now I'm going over the top of that nose, underneath it, everything that I had kind of colored up a little bit with that YR18 underneath that nose. I'm going in with the indigo blue and going right over the top of that. It's still, for the most part, reads pretty orange. You can kind of see a blue tint to it, but now I'm going to bring in this poppy red. I'm going to go right over the top of that indigo blue, and I'm going to stretch it out even further. And it's going to read a dark orange where it had the indigo blue, and it's going to read a little bit darker orange with that poppy red over the top of that orange. It looks super groovy. I love this coloring combination. I'm also going to use this poppy orange to push that back even further up underneath those berries. I didn't bring in any more indigo blue. I didn't need to do that. I did have plenty of that, but I could go over the top of that indigo blue and push it back a little bit further, few more layers with this poppy red, and it would look like it's receding back that much further. I'm also going to bring this up along the top portion of his nose and the bottom portion towards the top of his nose just a little bit more and blend that out. Now it does get to the point where here on the tip of his nose, it doesn't look like I'm leaving any of that Copic coloring to shine through. I totally am. I'm making sure that I keep my pencil super sharp so I can get into those tight little areas and I'm not coloring over the top of things that I don't want to. And look at that. We have orange with shade and shadow and movement. Now I do want to get this portion right here to stand out just a wee bit more, as well as here on his band. So I have the Prismacolor Cream pencil, and it's just super light. It is barely noticeable. In fact, I take a little bit of time to kind of build that up and then kind of step away from it because it really didn't need a whole lot and I probably could have skipped it. And now that I have his nose colored in, I do want that shade, that shadow, and actually it would be a cast shadow because his nose would be casting a shadow over this portion of his face. I do want that to read a little bit darker, and now that I have some color reference there with his nose and the shading in that, I can come back in with that indigo blue and that periwinkle and push that back just a little bit more in that area. So now I'm going to start coloring in his hat, and we are actually almost done. Overall, this took probably about an hour and a half to color everything in. Overall, it was pretty simple, and I really, really enjoyed it. So I have the Prismacolor in 90% cool gray. I am using cool gray specifically because I have other cool colors in this image. If you use a warm gray, that would probably be all right. However, this is a big enough area that you're probably going to see the notice in your tones. Yeah, I'm going to go out on a limb and say you're definitely going to see a difference in your tones. So I very specifically chose the cool grays for this. Now in that 90% cool gray, that went where I had my C7, and I blend that out. I am not going in with a heavy hand here. In fact, I can still see plenty of that C7 shining through on this. I'm not trying to completely cover it up. I'm just trying to reinforce a lot of it. Now at this point, this is where I also could have fixed the top portion of his hat. I could have taken this 90% way further up there and kind of corrected some of that highlight. I totally didn't think about it until I was done with it, and then I decided that I was done with it, so it wasn't a big deal. After my 90% cool gray, I come in with a 70% cool gray, and then I finish everything off with a 50% cool gray. But again, at no point do I have a heavy hand, and at no point am I trying to cover up each of those Copic colors that I have underneath it. You don't need to do that. All right, so at this point, I'm going to speed this up. I am just going to do the same thing that I have been doing and just kind of clean up those lines or reinforce those shaded areas, go over the top with them of each additional color, and then I'm going to call it good. I don't end up adding a whole lot of highlight to any portion of this hat. I do bring in the Pablo and kind of go through around the center a little bit of that hat and kind of right there at the bridge of that brim, or right there on the edge of that brim. Let me try that again. But that's about it. I'm not trying to make this look like it's white or it has any hot spots or stark highlights. It's not necessary. This is a black hat, and I want to try to keep it black, so I don't need to add too much of that. So actually, I was just looking at my calendar here, and it looks like next week I will be doing a card where we will be taking a look at Copic coloring in white, and I use some of the same color combination that I did here on this guy's face, but I'm going to be coloring in a flower. And it's actually surprising, the process of coloring in white, especially on a little bit more complicated images. But I love how it turns out. I just think that coloring white in Copics is probably the most gratifying thing that you can do as a colorist. So we're going to be taking a look at that and talking about that a little bit more. And I also realized that I actually am not sharing a whole lot of Christmas art with you guys this year. Typically, I make a bunch of it and I share a bunch of it, but for some reason this year, I'm not. So anyway, if that's something that you're interested in, do be sure to leave me a comment and let me know, and I shall see what I can do for you. But I had tons of fun coloring this guy in, and if I had more time on my hands, I would have like 5 of these in different colored scarves because I think he is just darling. All right, that is it. We are done. We are good to go. I have more details and links down in the description below, as well as in today's post over on Patreon. Remember that there is a PDF available with a detailed supply list for your convenience, and this video will be available tomorrow on my YouTube channel, the much shorter, quicker version, so do be sure to check that out and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Thanks again so much for joining me. Until next time.